You are now listening to 1-900 Old Ladies, The Lost Art of Making Lefse, written by L. Lee Starr, narrated by the author. Post-production by Pinto Media. Chapter 13. In the meantime, you can heat up your griddles and get them to a steady medium hot temperature. This is important now. Are you listening, Ellie? Get it hot, but steady hot. Otherwise, your bread will burn or be too soft on the inside. Sigrid Siebertson. The North Dakota climate had heated up comfortably the first week of May. In fact, it could have been considered pleasantly, toasty warm. Summer had set in, and Marge and Ellen once again received an even bigger 900 revenue check than they had for the month of April. But Ellen knew it was only a matter of time before her son appeared on her doorstep. He had inadvertently discovered the truth about her and her sister's 900 sex chat line. Ellen had always tried to set a good moral example for her son. How was she going to explain this? Stan Jr. had packed up Rosa, little Robert, and 2 weeks' worth of clothing and supplies. He took a leave of absence from his AC installation job, claiming that he had a family crisis to attend to. He then drove his family in their Dodge minivan from Tucson to Himmel in 3 days. Ellen anticipated that she would reluctantly have to let Stan Jr. in. She didn't anticipate that he would also bring Rosa and little Robert with him. When he showed up on her doorstep with Rosa and little Robert in tow, she happily let him in. She greeted them all ecstatically with hugs and a big grandma kiss. Oh my gosh, isn't he just a sight for sore eyes? Oh, Marge, look at this little guy. Margie cooed at the little 8-month-old infant as Ellie took him from his mother. I can't tell you how good it is to see ya, Ellen cried joyously. At first, Stan Jr. looked amazed when his mother greeted him at the front door. You look different, Mom. You look younger. Rosa added, You look great, Mom. Very sexy. You think so? Ellie responded, blushing. Yeah, something different. Of course, this blissful reunion brought almost everyone joy, except for Stan Jr. He somehow had assumed the role of disciplinarian, and he couldn't fathom the idea that his mother had been reduced to engaging in such a deviant line of work as conducting a sex chat line in order to pay the bills. He also seemed a little shaken by the idea that she had discarded her North Dakota schoolteacher appearance for a more updated and youthful image. This was not how he remembered his mother. Ellen invited her son and his family in as they gathered at the kitchen table. Are you hungry? You must be starved and exhausted. She shook her head again, and she handed little Robert to Marge. I'll make you something to eat real quick. Stan Jr. chimed in. No, Mom, we need to talk. He pulled out the yellow flyer he had procured in Las Vegas. Explain this, he demanded. Ellen's face fell. Resigned, she sat down. Well, dear, Aunt Margie and I, we needed to make money. My pension was far too small for the both of us to manage, and your dad left me with almost nothing. As it turns out, Uncle John was also swindled by some insurance guy before he died. Stan Jr. appeared clearly disillusioned by his mother's confession. Mom, you mean men actually call you? You? Why, son, is that so hard to believe? She paused before continuing her explanation. Look, hon, I know you think I'm an old lady, and probably I am. But everybody, young people, old people, we all need to feel special. We all need to feel loved. Honestly, Robert, Stanley leaving was probably the best thing that could have happened to me. There was an uncomfortable pause in the conversation as Stan Jr. assumed a look of utter indignation. Mom, I'm Stan Jr. Huh? Ellen looked puzzled, while Margie seemed suddenly concerned. Mom, you called me Robert. My name is Stan. Oh, for heaven's sake, son, don't you think a mother knows her own child? Blowing him off, Ellen rose from the table. Well, if you're not going to eat, I'll just show Rosa and little Robert your room. She retrieved her grandson from Margie's cooing arms and retreated up the stairs to the guest bedroom. Rosa followed behind. Ellen, Rosa, and little Robert departed, while Stan Jr. and Margie remained at the table to continue their conversation. Now they both were clearly concerned, and Stan was ready to lay a large portion of the blame on his wayward aunt. Aunt Margie, how could you let this happen? This isn't Mom. Why didn't you guys ask us for money? We would have sent you something. You know it's not like your mother to ask for anything. That's not what we Sievertsons do. Hell, Grandma Sigrid died of God knows what in her bed for months and refused to see a doctor. We've always done things on our own, and we've never expected anything from anybody. You know your father left your mother for dead. Christ, Dan, she almost died of hypothermia. I'm only grateful that I had these 2 900 numbers to use. That was the one thing John had left me after 40 years of marriage. If you ask me, you should be ashamed of yourself. You don't need to make your mother feel guilty for this. She always did what was best for you. She stayed with that old codger all those years for your sake. Now you've got to do what's best for her and let her live her life. Stan Jr. gazed down shamefully at the flyer, which he still held in his hands. Marge continued her speech. Look, Stan, what I'm really concerned about now is that... She bent down to whisper to her nephew, afraid that her sister might eavesdrop. Between you and me, I think Ellie is losing it. What do you mean? Stan asked. I mean, she's not playing with a full deck. You know, the wheel is turning, but the hamster is dead. Seriously, she is so friggin' scatterbrained. I'm going to have to start writing Sven and Ellie jokes up here. I think she might have Alzheimer's. What makes you say that? You just heard it, Stan. She called you Robert. You know, Robert, her old boyfriend from 30 years back, and your half-brother. She does that all the time. She forgets things like how to make lefse. She has never forgotten how to make lefse. Sometimes she gets up in the morning like she's getting ready to teach school. Hell, she's been retired for 8 years. You really think she's senile? Stan inquired. Think? I know. Look, Stan, she's endured so much crap from your father. It's not even funny. You know, you grew up here. Is it any wonder she's lost it? You would have lost it if you stayed. What do we do, Aunt Marge? Stan Jr. was obviously overwhelmed. I don't want to put her in a home. I can't afford to put her in a home if I wanted to. Your father left her with nothing. I don't know, Stan, but if I can help it, that won't happen. Ellie is the only thing I've got now, and I'm not about to lose her. Stan suddenly looked bright-eyed as a tremendous idea crossed his mind. What if we have an auction? Sell all Dad's junk out in the barn? Hell no, Margie replied. Your mother would never go for that. The few times I mentioned going out to the barn, she went crazy. She said that Stanley would be pissed when he came back if people were messing with his shit. See, Stan, this is what I'm saying. Your mother is not your mother. She is someone else. And I think it's because she's loony. Lord only knows how long she's been like this. What if she doesn't know, Aunt Margie? What do you mean? Here's my idea. Let's send her to town tomorrow with Rosa. You and I can break into the barn and see what's in there. If we decide there's enough there to auction, we'll send her on a trip somewhere, sell all Dad's stuff, and give her the money to support herself. Then she won't have to do all this 900 nonsense. Stan related his well-thought-out plan as if he had spent every moment during his journey to Himmel devising it. How much do you think all that crap is worth? From what I remember, with the antique guns and machinery and equipment, I'd say we might raise $40,000 or $50,000. Holy crap! That much for all Stanley's junk? You sure? Marge asked. I'm positive. Maybe even more than that. We need to find it all, sort it all, and sell it all. Early the next day, Rosa Peters was instructed to create an all-day diversion for her mother-in-law, using her young son as bait. She drove Ellen to Bismarck for a day of shopping. Immediately after the trio departed, Marge and Stan Jr. made their way to the dilapidated barn. The doors were closed and padlocked shut. This wasn't the old combination padlock that Stan Jr. remembered. This was a new padlock, which required a key. He managed to borrow a pair of bolt cutters at the local machine shop in town. He cut the lock. The great doors to the old barn swung wide as they creaked. And as they opened, a horrendous stench of decay wafted out from inside the barn. Overcome by the odor, Margie gasped. Stan Jr. shielded his face under the neckline of his t-shirt. They each stepped 5 feet inside, still overcome by the tremendously overpowering odor. Christ, something died in here, Margie cried. Stan Jr. stood aghast as he surveyed the mountainous assembly of tools and machinery before him. What the hell? He questioned, obviously perplexed. How did all this crap get like this? Margie asked. Heck if I know. Haven't you come in here at all? Hell no. Your mother would freak out if she knew we were here now. It looks like a huge pile of dog shit. Look, there are even flies circling overhead. Margie started to pull at some smaller tools to loosen them from the enormous heap. Stan Jr. followed the swarm of flies overhead toward the rear of the humongous pile of tools. Horrified, his face immediately lost all its color. He stepped back and leaned against a beam. He struggled not to faint. Margie glanced up from the heap at her nephew. What is it? She asked. Stan only grunted as he pointed to something buried at the bottom of the heap. He was obviously sickened by this discovery, which lay entrapped beneath the twisted mire of rusted tools and machinery. There, under the huge heap of metal, lay the rotting corpse of his dead father. Stanley Sr. had died there in the barn just as he had lived, buried beneath a monstrous pile of crap which he had possessively regarded as his entire life's work. A half hour after their traumatic discovery, Stanley Jr. and his Aunt Marge showed up at the Himmel County jailhouse. He was still white as a sheet, and she was almost hysterical. We need to speak to Sheriff Baker, Margie demanded. The desk clerk went to the back office to fetch the sheriff, who came out moments later. Sheriff, I don't know how to tell you this, but we found Stanley Peters dead in Ellie's barn, Margie blurted. Is that so? Paul Baker asked. He didn't seem surprised. Yes, Sheriff, and it looks like he's been dead for some time. How'd he die? Can you tell? Looks like he was buried alive under all his tools, Marge volunteered. He must have been there all winter long. I don't think that Ellen even knew he was out there. The sheriff grabbed the keys to his squad car. Well, let's go take a look. They returned to the barn. The sheriff surveyed the damage inflicted by the heavy pile of tools onto the rotting corpse, which was once Stanley Sr.'s body. Yep, looks like he was buried alive, the sheriff commented, studying the pile of metal and the decaying flesh and bones beneath. Lord knows how long he was out here before he died. Could have been minutes. Could have been days. Hard to tell at this point. I imagine he was partly frozen during the winter, and he probably started to thaw a couple of months ago when it started to warm up around here. He stated his theory very matter-of-factly, as though he was emotionally desensitized to the horrific scene. Stan Jr. remained silent, still in shock and almost on the verge of tears. We're going to have to send him off to Bismarck for an autopsy, Paul Baker commented. Bismarck? Margie asked. Can't we just bury him? Not likely. What if there was foul play? It's hard to tell with this much decomposition what actually happened. Better to send him off to the medical examiner. Margie, at first almost pervertedly amused by the idea that Stanley had finally gotten his comeuppance, now became seriously concerned for her sister's welfare. What? You think Ellie? She entreated Paul Baker for an explanation. I'm not sure. Paul glanced back at Stan Jr., who was still in a state of shock. Are you going to be okay, son? Stan nodded. Marge interrupted the sheriff. Wait, Sheriff, do you think we can just dig him out quickly and cart him away before Ellie gets home? Dig him out? The sheriff quizzed. Yeah. Margie began her feeble explanation. Honestly, Sheriff, I'm not sure Ellie is in her right mind. Stan will corroborate, won't you, Stan? Still speechless, Stan nodded in agreement. I think she's lost it. I really don't think she knows Stanley died in here, and I can't begin to believe that she had anything to do with it. You know Ellie, Sheriff. You were the one who called me up here. This is not her doing. She wouldn't hurt a fly. Margie continued. Can we just ship him off to the coroner without her knowing about it? That way we can find out what actually killed Stanley first. Once Ellie is cleared of any wrongdoing, we can break it to her gently. I really don't know, in her present state of mind, if knowing Stanley is dead wouldn't just send her off the deep end for good. The sheriff considered Margie's request. He pensively walked around the heaped pile of twisted tools and metal and shook his head. I just don't understand how this happened. Then he decisively looked up. I tell you what, I'll bring my officers out here and we'll take some crime scene photos. Survey the contents of the barn, if that's even possible. How long will Miss Sievertson be gone? She's in Bismarck. She'll be gone all day, Marge answered. As he turned to leave, the sheriff shook his head one last time. He patted Stan Jr. reassuringly on the arm. Sorry again, Stan. Must be terrible to see your dad this way. Let me know if there's anything I can do. The sheriff left, and Margie breathed a sigh of relief as she spoke to her nephew. You see what I mean? This is just going to kill your mother. Stan finally managed to muster up the courage to speak. Do you think Mom had anything to do with this, Aunt Margie? I really don't know. If she did, Stanley drove her to it. Chances are, if she did kill him, she might not even remember doing it. I saw this happen to guys in Korea. Shell shock. She paused for a moment. Shit. I should have known when she pulled out that roll of $20 bills. Roll of bills? Dad had a roll of bills with him when he came to Tucson. I gave it back to him when I bailed him out of jail. He usually kept it in that empty Folder's coffee can over there on the ground. Holy crap, Margie cried, exasperated. And she closed her eyes as she fought back her overwhelming tears of frustration. Oh, Ellie dear, how am I going to get you out of this long, hard, dirty dildo of a pickle?